Molt bé, doncs benvinguts i benvingudes a aquesta primera edició del Seminari. Soc en Joan Aromí. Aquest seminari està organitzat per dos grups de recerca. Un és el GREF, el grup de recerca en Educació Física, del qual jo soc el representant. I res, benvinguts en aquest seminari. Passo la paraula a l'Antoni Tort, que és el representant de l'altre grup de recerca. Toni, endavant.
Okay, thank you, Joan. Good afternoon to all of you. I am Antoni Tort, professor at the University of Vic, and just a few words as coordinator of the educational research group, this university, to welcome all the people connected to this session, that I am sure it will be a very interesting meeting. And we hope to repeat it in person in the future, in Canada, in Colombia, in Mallorca, in Barcelona. I don't know. Yeah. Okay. Thanks a lot. I apologize in advance if I have to leave the meeting before it ends. But thank you for this meeting. And okay, it's all right.
Okay. Thank you, Joan, and thank you, Tony. Welcome. Everybody, and now we want to explain how it goes this session. First of all, we need that all micros will be off when people is presenting their speech. And after, when we finish the first part, in the moment of the debate, you can do your questions like you as you want. You can raise the hand. If you see, you can see a place when you can raise the hand, or maybe if you don't have this icon, you can write your questions in the chat. Okay, it's not necessary we need to have an order, but it's not necessary to write all the questions. We want that people can talk and share and listening to our words and our voices. Well, I am beginning with a little presentation, with a short presentation. That in this presentation we are talking Núria Simó, I am Núria Simó, and Manuel Prada. So let's go. Well, this story, we want to talk a short story, why we are here now, and for that we want to share with you how this story begins. And 1 year before, in December of 2019, Manuel Prada from the Universidad Pedagógica Nacional de Colombia came to our university, and they talk about Pork contributions about research about educational narrative research. In at this moment, we did a presential talk with people from our faculty. After this talk, we plan a work group, un grupo de trabajo sobre investigación narrativa, a work group about narrative research, and this group began to meet each other from January 2020 until now. We did 9 sessions, and in these sessions we are different people, but in this slide you can see people who is involved in all sessions until now. Joan Arimí, Núria Simó, Gemma Torres, David Rodríguez and Ana Gómez from the University of Vic, and Margarita Gutiérrez, Manuel Prada, Carol Pertuz, and Jorge Aponte from the Universidad Pedagógica Nacional de Colombia. This work group is based on narrative research experience of each participant. The seminar aims to broaden the group's perspectives and create an academic community. 3 questions are be at the heart of the debate: epistemological, political, and ethical challenge of our experience in narrative research, how we deal with narrative inquiry, and challenge and future perspectives. But in July of 2020, we discovered this book, Engaging in Narrative Inquiries with Children and Youth, by Jean Clandinin, Vera Kane, Sean Lessard, and Janice Huber. And at this moment, we contacted with Janice Huber, and she answered our email very quickly and delighted to share our projects and our experiences. So at the moment, we started to, at September, we began to prepare this seminar with Janice Huber from the University of Alberta, with Muna Saleh from the Concordia University of Edmonton, with Emma Quiles from the University of Barcelona, with Trudy Cardinal from the University of Barcelona, and Alberta, sorry, and with Sean Murphy with the University of Saskatchewan. Saskatchewan, sorry. Now I don't explain more about them because Manuel is going to continue, and when he explains about we will organize the seminar, and he will present them. The questions about the seminar are these 3 also. What are the epistemological, political, and ethical implications of narrative inquiry? How is narrative inquiry done? What does it mean to do this kind of research with young people and children? And what are the challenges of narrative inquiry in different fields of knowledge, education, social science, philosophy, for social transformation? And now Manuel will explain you the goals and organization of the seminar, and he will present our colleagues from Canada. Please, Manuel, when you want.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the presentation. Nuria, welcome to our friends from Canada and our other colleagues and students and colleagues from some other universities and places. I want to point out that this experience is an experience of hospitality, because not only because we are from different countries, different contexts, different disciplines of knowledge, but because we have to try to understand each other in different languages. We have to do an effort to understand, and this implies that we try to open our heart, open our capacity of listening, open our capacity of paying attention, and to make each other to understand. And thank you so much for your patience, not only for Canadian and from the people from other countries that are here, people who don't speak Spanish, or in other case, who don't speak English, or as us, who don't speak really good enough English. Thank you for your patience and for your attitude for hospitality. Okay, this is the program that perhaps you all know because Johan has sent it before. I just want to read and point out some indications. First, we are in the introduction of this space. After that, we will listen to our colleagues. They have prepared a presentation entitled Engaging in Narrative Inquiries with Children and Youth by Janice Huber, etc. I will talk about them before, and of course, they will talk about themselves when they give the lecture. After that, we will have a debate. The idea is, as Nuria has told before, you can speak in Spanish, in Catalan, in English. We will try to translate if it's possible. And after the debate, we will have a little break to drink coffee in our case, in Colombian, or water or wine or whatever. And after that, we will present our experience in this seminar. We have prepared, we have written a text where we explain our questions, our experience, of course, and we will try to put in order some ideas that we have discussed about the last 12 months. And after our reading of this paper, we will have a debate and concluding thoughts. And the idea is that we project the future, project future meetings, project future projects. At least we want to have the opportunity to dream about another meet. That's all by now about the program. If you have any question, please write a message on the chat and we will try to answer. And after that, I will read in Spanish our translation of a story that Janice and her team has prepared to talk about them. This is a non-regular way to present, to introduce people when they give a lecture like that. And this is really interesting, and this shows how a narrative perspective is involved in every single part of our academic life. So thank you for this way to introduce yourself. Nuria, voy a presentar entonces la pantalla quizás.
¿Quieres el texto? ¿Pongo el texto?
No.
No, pero esta está en la pantalla.
One moment, please. Okay. Ellas han titulado su texto Nuestra genealogía relacional. Nuestras relaciones se prolongan a través del tiempo, el lugar, las situaciones, las culturas, las razas, las orientaciones, los idiomas, las relaciones y mucho más. Algunas de nosotras nos conocemos desde hace mucho tiempo. Otras nos conocimos por primera vez a través de escritos publicados anteriormente y más recientemente nos hemos encontrado en persona y nos vamos conociendo. Aunque hay un lugar institucional, el Centro de Investigación para la Formación y el Desarrollo del Profesorado de la Universidad de Alberta, en el que cada una de nosotras ha participado físicamente, nuestro acercamiento relacional se ha visto moldeado por nuestro desvelo intencional sobre cómo vivimos la investigación narrativa. Vemos la investigación narrativa como una forma de componer nuestras vidas que vive y se nutre en nuestra investigación y escritura y, de forma central, en y a través de nuestra enseñanza y nuestras vidas, lugares y relaciones cotidianas. A través de las relaciones y de cada una de nuestras decisiones resueltas de animarnos y acompañarnos mutuamente, hemos llegado a co-componer un lugar de seguridad en una comunidad que hemos creado entre nosotras y otras personas, en la que extendemos las invitaciones a otros, incluyendo las próximas generaciones de investigadores e investigadoras narrativos, que ven, practican y buscan hacer crecer la investigación narrativa de manera integral. Colectivamente, compartimos un interés permanente por las experiencias de las personas y además por lugares y seres distintos a los humanos. Lo central es que soñamos, imaginamos y nos esforzamos continuamente entre nosotras y con los demás por conseguir mundos mejores, más inclusivos y justos. Como nos enseñó nuestra amiga, colega y coinvestigadora, la doctora Mary Isabel Jung, Singing Turtle Woman, antes de ir a la universidad, hay que saber quién se es, y esto es igual en la investigación. Para nosotras, esto significa que cada día llegamos a la investigación narrativa, a la formación docente, a nuestras múltiples identidades relacionales, indagando en nosotras mismas, en nuestro devenir en relación. A partir de esta diversidad, hemos llegado a reconocer cómo cada una de nosotras está dando forma al campo, creando aperturas para los demás y trayendo a otros a estas aperturas que estamos manteniendo abiertas y co-creando. A partir de esta animación intencionada de las relaciones y de la experiencia, la metodología crece. Si se estanca, deja de honrar la experiencia porque entonces se solidifica en una especie de teoría de la comprensión, de la experiencia, en lugar de prestar atención a la experiencia misma. This is the presentation, the introduction. Esta es la presentación que ha preparado el grupo. Muna, Emma, Janice, Trudy. Who is the other? Sorry.
Sean.
Sean, thank you very much for being here.
Thank you so much, Manuel. I was wondering if Muna, can you share the slides and we can start? Is that okay?
I'm sorry, I'm trying, but it says that screen sharing is disabled.
Oh,
I think it says that the host has disabled screen sharing. Yeah. Okay, I can share now. Thank you.
thank you, Muna. Thank you so much. Well, good morning or good afternoon. My name is Emma Quires Fernandez, and I'm very happy to be here. And it was quite interesting to hear the translation of the genealogy in my language. So I'm very appreciative of that. I don't know if my other colleagues want to say hi or hello.
Yes, I apologize. Hi, my name is, I was trying to figure out, because I'm looking at my phone because the script wouldn't print out. But anyways, my name is Muna Saleh, and I'm very honored to be here with you all today as well.
Is it my turn?
Nope, it's my turn. I was muted, sorry. My name's Sean Murphy. I'm from the University of Saskatchewan. I'm very happy to be here as well. Thank you very much.
Sorry about that. My name is Trudy Cardinal. I'm from the University of Alberta, and I am super excited to be here. I've always wanted to go to Spain. Thank you.
Hi, everyone. I too am really excited. I have been since Nuria sent that email last July. And we want to express gratitude for what you said a few moments ago about hospitality and our learning and thinking and growing together through this process. We also wanted, as we start today, to share and to think with you about narrative inquiry, to begin by acknowledging and expressing gratitude to the land and to the original and continuing First Nations and Métis peoples on whose land we are situated and whose enduring relationships with, knowledge of, and care for this land has sustained us and our ancestors across time and places in what is now known as Canada. So Emma, I think you're next. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. So our invitation is to think at the beginning with the two stories we are going to share with you and to allow them to work on you. That is our invitation, firstly. The stories you have received by email come from two different studies developed by Muna and me, and we look at these stories as part of our interim research text. We do know that narrative inquiry follows a recursive, circular, reflexive process of moving from field with the starting points in telling or living stories to field data to interim and final research text. And for all of us, the movement from composing field text to composing interim research text is a time marked by some tensions, let me tell you, and some uncertainty. And in composing interim research text, we are continuously thinking narratively. So we position the text with the three common places that I'm sure Sean will say something about that later. Due to that, we want to start with the two stories that are part of our research we develop, and we acknowledge that these interim research texts are partial texts and are not closed, and that might help us to co-compose here in the seminar all together a conversation around the multiplicity of possible meanings. And we also hope a conversation around epistemological, ontological, ethical aspects of narrative inquiry. So we are gonna first start with my story, and after we'll move into Muna's stories, and we'll be attending to the epistemological and ontological commitments alongside Sean and Trudy, and Janice will help us to think narratively with these stories, attending to living in relationally ethical ways. And Muna and I will come back to our interim research text to weave some aspects that Sean, Trudy, and Janice have opened for all of us in the presentation. During my postdoctoral work, and still nowadays, I pondered about experiences of a kindergarten teacher as she co-composed a curriculum of care alongside the children. And recalling Nodin's, Perdelara, Diotima, Goldstein, and Long's work, I was interested in exploring and understanding, caring for the relationship with the children and caring for the ideas and wisdom that each children embody. And so Tessa is, because she will always be the kindergarten teacher that I was alongside, and that is a story that took place in Tessa's classroom in a kindergarten educational setting. There are many stories from my days alongside Tessa in the kindergarten that continue to appear as memories in the distance now. Stories that come back again and again because they connect with something that my students raise in class, or with the stories that colleagues share with me, or with the scenes that I observe when I visit elementary schools here in Barcelona. stories that as teacher, educator, and researcher reappear in my body, in my heart, and in my mind. And probably those stories are the recurrent and the repeated ones emerge again because there is something educational in them that I must rethink, or at least this is the way that I read how they reappeared in my body. And I am sure that I need to go through them, to travel with them again, to open a symbolic space inside me, to embrace them holistically. These stories, not anecdotes, have their own comings and goings, and they stretch over time and attend to educational, personal, social, and aesthetical dimension. The stories I'm talking about are stories that have the quality, as Dewey said, of being indefinitely elastic. And for today, I want to share with you one of those stories that never ends, but it always changes, the story of Daniel. On the first day of kindergarten, children came to class with a toy or a puppet and some of their family members. Tessa and the kindergarten teacher shared with me that coming to school for the first time is exciting for everyone. As we talked, some children entered the classroom and carefully watched the space and all the books, letters, and toys that Tessa had placed for them. Without a doubt, the first day of class was a combination of feelings and sensations. There was the desire to meet the other people and the surprise for what was going to happen that day, and the rest of the year. For Tessa, every first day meant to be close to the beginning, or being close to the many beginnings, getting to know each other, leaving home, discovering what a school could be, understanding what it meant to live with others, learning to write and to read. As I was looking for a free chair for one of the grandmothers who had come to class, someone pulled my shirt. He was a 4-year-old boy with brown eyes in an orange jacket. There, he said, pointing to that empty chair. I turned around and saw it. When I was going to thank him and ask his name, the boy was already on the carpet. He seemed engaged with the way Tessa was sharing with the children. Daniel, she asked. Here, said the little boy wearing his orange jacket. So he's Daniel, I told myself. He turned to his brother to say hi. Then I noticed how his younger brother had a jacket just like him, orange. During the first month of school, I realized that Daniel was sensitive, wide awake, and attentive to what surrounded him. He loved to run in our recess time, and although he didn't chat too much, his brown and big eyes were expressive enough to make himself understood by children and adults. Some days, his little brother and his mother, who was pregnant at that time, picked him up. Other days, he came back home with his grandfather. One afternoon, when class was over, I remained near him with the last 3 children, and I asked them if they had any special plans for the rest of the day. Aaron said he was going to the mall to buy a couch. Jessie replied, "Wow, how fancy, Aaron." "My dad," said Aaron, "works in a new office and he needs a new and big couch." Jessie replied, "My parents work at McDonald's." Aaron said, "My dad has a big office and wants to buy a white couch. McDonald's is boring." And Jessie said, "I like McDonald's. I can draw and paint using those big tables. And I can eat French fries and drink Coke." And Daniel added, "You know that? You know what? Today I will play with the PlayStation by myself." And Jessie asked, "Why alone?" And Aaron added, "Amazing plan, Daniel." The 3 children were so encouraged in the conversation. They talked about their favorite games when they had played, what had happened to them. I didn't understand anything. In fact, I didn't know what the games they were talking about or how they were played. They seemed to enjoy the conversation. They laughed and say, "No way, did you see? So did you see? Okie dokie, that is awesome." Even though I didn't understand all the terminology they use, I felt there was something that brought them together. The desire to tell, to listen, to share, and to be part of each other's worlds. Suddenly, as Daniel was zipping his coat, He said out loud, "Maybe today I will play with my dad. It depends. It depends if he comes back home drunk or not." All three of us were drawn by the silence. No one knew what to say. Not Aaron, not Jesse, not me. We looked at each other. Aaron zipped his coat and ran off. Jesse looked at me while holding Daniel's backpack. Daniel took the bag and ran right after Aaron. Jesse and I said bye using our inner voice, and I remained by myself in the classroom, feeling the weight of silence on my shoulders. I was shocked, frozen. I asked myself if I had heard the words, if I understood what the boy just said. In part, I tried to convince myself that my English was not good enough and I could be wrong. However, I knew what I heard, how to tell Tessa, the teacher. I didn't know how to explain it, how to put words to something that was bigger than me, a story that was bigger than me. I felt I was not yet able to name it. The ethical responsibility of the research was also playing a significant role there. When Tessa came back to the class and asked me how my day had been, I requested her to slow down a bit, to sit together and have a coffee. And we began a conversation. It is funny how right there, two landscapes open at the same time. The landscape of action or what happened, and the landscape of consciousness or what those involved in action were feeling, thinking, or knowing at that time. In that moment, I became aware of how both landscapes were important when seeking to understand the caring experience and my experience as narrative inquirer. I left the school after our conversation and checked my phone. I was late for the bus. And let me tell you, in Canada, if you're late for the bus, you have a problem. So I was late for the bus and I began to run as the children had done before. I didn't want to spend 15 or 20 minutes in the cold weather. Fortunately, the bus driver knew me and waited for me. "You ready?" he asked. On my way home, I thought about how a holistic understanding of the caring experience required me to understand that the individual stories were immersed, as Murray wrote, in a complex sea of stories. What I didn't know was that that silent sharing classroom would be the last one in Daniel's presence. The day after, he didn't come back to school, and neither the week after our conversation about the PlayStation games. So some of the boys began to ask Tessa what had happened with Daniel. "Miss T, is he sick? Did he move to another school? Is he coming back tomorrow?" Tessa didn't know what story to share with them. "I don't know, boys. I will try to call his family again," she added. "Yeah, Miss T, call them. Come on, call them," said Leila. 2 weeks later, some of the children began to ask again, "Is he on vacation? Will he come back? Was his little sister born?" And Tessa had called social services. Apparently, no one had mentioned he would be starting in another school. Tessa answered the children, saying how unsure she was about it. Perhaps he needed to go to another neighborhood with his family. "I'm not sure. We will see. But we still have his sleepers here, so he might be able to come again." Days and weeks went by and Daniel didn't come back. I noted in my journal how some boys miss him, and I wondered where he could be. One morning after our field trip to the sports center, I was approached by Isaiah's mother, who very discreetly asked me if something had happened to Daniel. At that moment, she came to me knowing I was not Isaiah's teacher, knowing that I was only a person who played, drew, danced, read, and sang with the children, knowing I was learning with them and pondering about the curriculum of care in these schooling days. But she didn't see me as an external person, neither as a researcher who was not part of the landscape. She was asking me for advice, noticing I had become, in some ways, a community member of the classroom and the school. 2 months later, when I went to Walmart, a supermarket as giant as the USA movies show, I was with my partner, amazed by the big sizes of some food packages, and suddenly I saw in one of the aisles a boy wearing an orange jacket, and I ran over there. I knew, don't ask me why, I knew it was Daniel, with his brother, mother, and the little baby sister who was born. I smiled at them And Daniel said, "She was the helper, Mommy." We had a very short chat about how the mother was after giving birth, but no one mentioned anything about a school. In one of Tessa's and my conversations, I shared how vulnerable I felt in thinking with Daniel's story. She already knew about my Walmart encounter. It broke my heart. "We literally don't know what has happened," she said while some tears fell down her cheeks. She didn't understand how she and the school could have lost track of the boy. While Daniel's belongings were still in class, we had the opportunity to come back to our memories, but also to imagine other possibilities. And his story moved me to another story, the story of myself as a 5-year-old girl who was not ready to say goodbye to my first once I needed to move from another school to another one. That day, through Tessa's words, I became aware of how together we were restoring early. As our meeting was profound and hard, Tessa asked me to switch off the recorder. I firmly believe that from that conversation on, our research relationship was nourished by more trust. During the process of this narrative inquiry alongside Tessa, I recall feeling the reverberations of the children's stories in my life as women, daughter, children, educator, and researcher. Several times I had a hard time naming and writing how their stories stayed with me, how I thought with them, and how they also shaped the ways in which I now see and experience educational relationship, the curriculum of care, and the school as a place where our stories converge. Revisiting now some of the notes I shared with Tessa, I feel that caring for Daniel's story is a way to acknowledge the layered landscapes in which his life was in the midst. For me, as narrative inquirer, to honor his story is now part of how Tessa sensitively attended to Daniel's travelings into different layers, familial, social, schooling, and cultural, layers that were part of his life as a child. So it's not only Daniel's story. In the ways in which we attend and ponder with his story, it has become our story too. In other words, Daniel's experiences is not my own, but is unique to me and unique to Tessa and to every child who had the chance to meet him in the kindergarten classroom. And I would love that also unique now for you that you know the story.
Thank you so much for that, Emma. I'm going to be thinking with that story as I share my own. And so this interim research text was written as I reflected on negotiating the beginnings of a narrative inquiry relationship alongside Fatima, another Muslim mother of a child with a disability. Fatima was somebody who came here as a refugee from Syria. And by here, I mean Treaty 6 territory, Edmonton, Alberta, Canada. And just how fraught with emotions, negotiating for me, that research relationship was and still is, in all honesty, because of my own positionality as a Muslim woman, but also as a mother of a child with a disability and as an intergenerational survivor of displacement. And so I share that now. Making da'at for khair. Khair just means, da'at for khair just means basically a prayer for all that is good. I slowed my walking pace as I approached the townhouse and checked to make sure the address matched the one Fatima gave me over the phone a few days ago. Although it was bright and sunny outside, the chilly wind reminded me that the fall season is very much upon us, and I smiled as I noticed a child's bicycle propped up against the front of the house. Climbing the first few steps to the front door, I wondered if the steps could be a barrier to accessibility for Fatima's eldest daughter, Iman. I was told by the newcomer service provider who put me in contact with Fatima that Iman had cerebral palsy and sometimes needed a wheelchair. Before I could knock on the front door, it was opened and I saw a petite but visibly pregnant woman in hijab smiling at me. Ahla wa sahla, that means welcome. Assalamu alaikum, Fatima. Peace and blessings to you, Fatima. Kifek, how are you doing? Wa alaikum salam, and peace and blessings on you. Alhamdulillah bi khair. So with gratitude, I'm well. Tfaddali, come on in. We kissed alternating cheeks 3 times in a traditional greeting before I took my boots off and was guided by Fatima into their family room a few steps away. Stepping into the room, I was taken aback at how beautiful it was. It was arranged with a majlis, which is a form of traditional seating, set upon beautifully engraved wooden frames, the thick fabric embroidered in warm and gold tones. I expressed my admiration for the room. She chuckled and commented that another Syrian refugee who lives nearby had been making and selling majlis sets at a very reasonable price. She asked me to make myself comfortable while she makes qahwa, which is traditional Arabic coffee. I tried to dissuade her from making it, but she insisted. Taking a few minutes as she left the room from the nearby kitchen, I noticed that there was a few pictures hanging around the prayer calendar near the open door frame. The pictures seemed to be recent ones of Fatima's 3 children. They were obviously taken as school pictures, but they had the company name in a diagonal proof embossed across them. The pictures were of her oldest son, Ali, who was 14 years old at the time, and 2 younger daughters, Iman, who was 12 years old, and Maryam, 10 years old. I walked a few steps to the kitchen entrance to ask Fatima to please not trouble herself, but she answered in the customary Arab response to my word. Mafish azab, there's no trouble. Ahla wa sahla wallah, you are so welcome. I asked her to then please allow me to carry the tray of qahwa and ma'moul, so that's a form of traditional cookies, to the living room. As we settled in our seats after pouring the qahwa a few moments later, we continued our conversation that had started on the phone a few days ago. I repeated that I was a teacher and researcher who was inquiring into the experiences of Muslim refugee mothers of children with disabilities, and how I was so happy that she had responded to the invitation that was extended by the Newcomer Settlement Agency. I said that my interest in coming to better understand her experiences was very personally meaningful for me as a Muslim woman who was also an intergenerational survivor of Palestinian displacement and mother to an autistic child. I explained that this research would mostly involve engaging in repeated conversations where we would share and relationally think about our stories of experience. Fatima responded that she is happy to make my acquaintance and asked when I arrived in Canada. I said that my dad came to these lands in the early 70s and that I was born and raised here. Fatima's eyes welled with tears as she remarked at how she was wondering why my Arabic was so halting and accented, but that she was now impressed that I was able to converse with her at all, considering I was born and raised here. She said that she hopes her children will be able to speak both Arabic and English fluently, inshallah. After a few minutes of general conversation, I asked Fatima if I could begin to record our conversation. She said, of course, and settled back in her seat. I brought out the participant information and consent form I had brought with me and asked her if she wanted to read it. I had it translated into Arabic and was also willing to read and discuss it with her as well. She shifted uncomfortably in her seat and softly remarked that she never learned how to read because she grew up in a small sheep herding community that was too far from any formal educational institution. She ruefully laughed and said that she thought that she had learned all the skills that she and her parents thought she would need to live a good life, alongside her husband, who also grew up in a similar community nearby. I was shocked into silent self-reproach for a few heartbeats before I said, okay, would you like me to read it to you? I can read it in Arabic if I go really slow. She chuckled and said that she trusts me and to please just summarize what the letter says. As I was trying to explain about the ethics, institutionally ethics approved letter had to say about informed consent and her, quote, right to withdraw at any time, I was mentally chiding myself for not even considering that potential co-inquirers may not have had formal schooling for many different reasons, because I had read that the official literacy rate in Syria was even higher than in Canada. I vowed to be even more wakeful to how my assumptions will be shaping how I try to relationally come alongside Fatima from now on. I planned to go slow in the first conversation to really focus on Fatima's childhood stories of experiences. But Fatima interrupted me as I was in the process of explaining how I wanted to construct an annal, basically a timeline of her stories over time. She expressed her excitement and nervousness at her due date being only weeks away, but that she hasn't been sleeping lately and is feeling a great deal of worry. Concerned, I asked if there's anything I could do to help. She expressed embarrassment and said that she typically doesn't get much sleep because she is constantly checking in on Iman to make sure that Iman's physically comfortable. So, but she was now worried about the additional anxiety of possibly going into labor in the middle of the night and not being able to get the help of the interpreter that the settlement agency had referred her to. With tears threatening to spill over, I'm sorry, I asked her if she would be comfortable calling me if that should happen. She looked surprised and said she didn't want to bother me. I replied that I hope she knows that I really want our relationship to not just be about research, but to also think of me as a friend and sister, and that I would be honored to help in any way possible. Fatima started crying at my words, and I moved closer to hug her as tears rolled down my face too. This was obviously pre-COVID. She said that she feels alone and that my words reminded her that her family is so far away from her right now. We sat with my hands on top of hers for the rest of our conversation. Sitting in the car and trying to settle my emotions as I prepared to drive home, almost 2 hours later, many more tears escaped my eyes. I knew this research would be difficult to engage in for many different reasons, including bearing witness to her stories of trauma of displacement. But I had not been awake to the multiple ways that her stories would touch at the very heart of so many of the stories living within me. Sean, I think it's you at this point. I'm not sure.
Yeah, but that's Trudy's slide. So I'm ontological commitments.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Nope, no, not at all. There we go. Oh, no, back one, back one. Excellent, great. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's morning here. Thank you very much for asking us to speak. So I thought I'd start off with a slide talking about narrative inquiry. And then my other slides will be about ontological commitments, which is a way of thinking about what is our orientation or worldview that draws us to narrative inquiry and that kind of research. So narrative inquiry is more than just telling stories. It's an inquiry into those narratives. So I actually prefer to use the word narrative rather than stories, because stories gets used in so many places in our culture that sometimes I think people think they disregard the importance and the possibilities of narrative. So I also think that we should understand that narrative inquiry could also be called inquiry into experience, but it is referred to as narrative inquiry because people recount their experiences, and we read about them narratively. It is about experience understood narratively. Okay, next slide. Thanks, Mona. As researchers, we understand that there is a process in our understanding and living of experience. This has a temporal quality to it. Our job as narrative inquirers is located in the retelling aspect. The participant has lived an experience and they tell us through a verbal retelling or an embodied action, which we might capture in a field note as we observe. Then we, as researchers, retell as we unpack it. This is akin to analysis. Then they may relive. We never know if they relive. I would contend that they do all the time, and we certainly relive. I have never been involved in an inquiry that I don't leave it and relive it or live it as a changed person. All my inquiries have affected me. Next slide. So ontology, and once again, that overview of our worldview, our orientation to the world. So here we see, and I'll talk about the stories here. In Emma's narrative, how it's situated in the temporal flow of her research. She begins at the start of a kindergarten year and notes the moments in that beginning. The sociality of her interim research text represents the various people with whom she interacted as a researcher. The children, the child who was the focus of the interim research text, Daniel, the teacher, the parents, and even the bus driver. Attending to all of these people shows the complexity of a narrative inquiry and captures the complexity of sociality. All of these people shape an understanding. This also takes place in a multiplicity of places, concrete places, the classroom, outside running for the bus, because it was cold and it gets really cold here, Walmart, big, which I avoid, it's too big. It is important to capture these places because along with temporality and sociality, they shape an understanding of experience. Sometimes we do that in a field note. So we capture that in a field note. So we write down our understandings of the place. We don't just take a picture. And when we're interviewing somebody and capturing that in a transcript, we also make a note about that experience. So field notes are important as well as the other kinds of field text that we would have in an inquiry. This is the same for Muna. There are fewer people in her interim research text, but we can also understand the implied sociality of customs and the reference to Iman, Fatima's daughter. Temporality exists in Muna's interest in Fatima's childhood, but the conversation does not go in that direction, and the conversation evolves on its own. I think it's important to note that in narrative inquiries, they are long-term inquiries and always involve multiple conversations through which relationships emerge. Relationships take time, as do narrative inquiries. In the field text, in the interim research text, we see how Muna gives an overview of her temporal experience, and this is echoed in Fatima's description of her childhood. Muna provides us with a description of Fatima's home, the welcoming space, and the honoring of family in the pictures of the children that are displayed. Just like Emma, Muna's interim research text includes a reference to the end of the research moment, that of Muna's experience as she prefers to drive away. The interim research text captures both the external experience of the research and the internal response experience of the researcher. They make clear that narrative inquirers do not bracket out who they are. Our experience is important, not more important than the participants, but our understanding of their experience is always filtered or understood through our own. What we pay attention to, what we note, are captured well in the narrative pieces that Emma and Muna shared. Next slide, thank you. Nope. That's my place all of a sudden. You would have heard Emma talk often in her story about how she was thinking with Daniel's experience, how she was thinking with Daniel's story. And this is an important thing, I think, for narrative inquirers, that we do not consider stories or narratives of experience as data. A narrative shared with us and all field texts we develop ultimately belong to the participant. They own their lives, and as researchers, we must respect that aspect of our research. Therefore, I always, when I'm working with students, for example, I will tell them that a participant can always decide to withdraw their narratives, the field notes that we've had, until we actually send out the narrative to be published, a dissertation, an article, because then we've lost control of it in a sense. So the participant, it's important to remember, always owns their narrative that they shared with us. And when we think with stories, as Emma has said a number of times, we are allowing the stories to work on us. This ties into the possible reliving that might occur for us as researchers. We are changed by the experience of the research, and we should be. To be open in many ways signals the relational nature of narrative inquiry. As a researcher and as an audience, we are no doubt being shaped by the stories of Muna and Emma. Thank you.
So, Muna, we're going to start here and then jump back to that runaway slide that went and put itself in the wrong spot. And then we'll come back to this order. So my name is Trudy Cardinal, as you all know, and oh wait, now I have to go find the spot in my own work. I want to begin by thanking you, Emma and Muna, for allowing us all this opportunity to inquire into and think with your interim text, with your narratives. I want to thank you, Sean, for beginning this process of our unpacking this together. While in the presentation, we have intentionally pulled out and separated the different commitments for a closer look. They are really interwoven and part of a whole. And so you will see some overlap in what we say as we each articulate our understanding of each of these commitments. I have been asked to attend to and share my understanding of epistemological commitments, or in other words, what is knowledge and how knowledge can be known. I have created a found poem from a discussion that I had with Janice, as together we thought about this question in the context of narrative inquiry. And so I want to start my sharing today with this found poem. It is all interconnected. Knowledge is relational. Experience is knowledge. People create knowledge and grow knowledge with other people and other beings. When we say that people are storied beings, we are also coming to that idea that the best way or closest way we can get to experiences is through story. Places and schools, and I would add institutions and hospitals, are also storied. Universities are storied. If we start to think narratively, we can see there is storied knowledge that is traveling in the midst, always understanding that we are all in the midst. It is not done. Those stories are evolving. Can you go back now, Muna, to that? Epistemological commitments. So one of the things that I think is really important as we think about narrative inquiry and the knowledge that we privilege as experience and how it is that we are co-composing this knowledge is to think about our own narrative beginnings. And so I've shared this quote that you could read at your own time, but I want to begin by thinking about how if these were two people, these two experiences that I was going to engage into my own narrative inquiry process with, I would really have to take the time to locate myself, because even now in this process, because I tend to live narratively and I inquire into many things in the same kind of process, is I have to think about who am I and my positionality as I listen to them. So as an Indigenous woman, as a Cree Métis girl growing up in small communities, there were so many ways these stories resonated with me. I could have looked at it from a, what literature review would I have done? And it could have shifted the stories that I came to understand and think about. In Emma's story, there's stories of kindergarten, transiency, leaving schools, realities of understanding the complexities of families, where lives and alcohol shapes that co-composing. There could be a lot of statistics that informed how we understand that little guy's story. But for me, because I have lived that so very closely, because we have often disappeared from schools in a moment's notice, I have often had to negotiate that what is happening with my mom when she's coming home, and to understand the whole being that she is, as she also negotiates these possibilities of a parent coming home drunk or not. And the courage of that little boy who found this trusting space that this became an everyday thing. I could play with my dad or I might not. And, that he's sharing this with his buddies in the same ways that they're sharing going to McDonald's. So there's so many beautiful stories that are in there that I hear in a particular way because of who I am. And so the importance of the autobiographical narrative beginnings in this idea of what is knowledge and co-composing knowledge is super important, because it's going to shape the kinds of knowledge that you're thinking about as you engage with the story. Sorry, I have my little puppy who barks at this one noisy neighbor. Just wait, let me. Usually for my most important meetings, I get her a play date, but it didn't happen. One sec. This guy's got to just keep going. Whenever she hears a cart rolling, she doesn't like that noise. We're good. Okay. So when I think with Muna's story that she shared of her experiences with this mom and how they have to negotiate medical institutions and the complexities of English not being first language, again, I can hear all of the, oh, what would other people want us to focus on the literature and starting from that place. And it would shape the stories that are told about that beautiful family and the ways Muna came to negotiate entry. You know, it would really shape it in different ways. So instead of staying with the living and the unfolding of experience and this mom and all of the complexity of that, we would be maybe taken in a different direction. So it was beautiful the ways that she articulated the role of community that she knows in caring for each other without directly saying it, just by being allowed to live alongside Muna as she engaged in this negotiating entry. We can just be a part of that living and that understanding and see how beautiful it is that she just gently, the way she was welcomed in with coffee and with cookies and all of these things that showed a shared understanding of how it is to negotiate relationship. And then that offering of community care so that there wasn't just the reliance on the formal processes of how to get a translator. So just narrative inquiry in this process is really important. Okay, now let's go find Muna. My other slide back in order. There we go. Okay. Thank you everyone for your patience. I got thrown off track by my, my wee boss, little dog. Okay, so what I also think is so beautiful about narrative inquiry as a research methodology is that dogs are allowed to show up in the presentations. But narrative inquiry as a research methodology and as a pedagogy is a way that it answers these questions about epistemological commitments and asking that what is knowledge and how can knowledge be known in ways that acknowledges and privileges that we are all knowers. The researcher, the co-researcher participants, the authors of these narratives, the reader, you and I, and that we come together to share stories just as Emma and Muna did, and now Sean, and then I, and then Janice, in a way that both share knowledge and share our process of coming together today to co-compose this knowledge. So as we think with the interim text, we see how both Emma and Muna shared stories of their experiences in the midst of research on a particular landscape with the co-researcher participant humans that they engaged with. And as we read with them and hear their internal thoughts and wonders and tensions and celebrations, and we imagine just being with them, looking up and looking around as if we were there too, we can truly begin to experience the ways as narrative inquirers, we truly do live in our world, living in the midst of a life that won't sit still, one always still unfolding. And there's not as a desire to pin down the particular knowledge, nor for the story to become static and treated as a thing that we could categorize and classify. Instead, the unfolding experience is understood to be knowledge, and the interim text invites us to co-compose knowledge with the lives and the experiences that Emma and Muna shared with us. Next slide. So one of the things that I am thinking about as I am here today is that invitation of hospitality. And so I tend to speak really fast when I'm nervous. And I am intentionally trying to be slow and careful because I know that we're all negotiating multiple languages, but even in the ways that I phrase words and the things that I say, I know because we haven't had much time to talk, you being in Spain and me being over here, even that itself takes some negotiation. So I thank you for your patience and your efforts for us to come together in this way. So I'm going to share right now that I had quite a bit of difficulties preparing for this presentation. I had trouble thinking about what I would share today because I live narrative inquiry in ways that is more intuitive. It's very intuitive, and I can't always find the words to articulate what it is I'm doing, how it is I'm living. It's a very embodied way of being in the world. And this way of being, doing, and knowing resonates so much with who I am as an Indigenous woman as well. So I'm negotiating that worldview to which resonates very well with the ways that we are doing things. So for me to find the words to share that, I have to really slow down and unpack what is it that I'm doing? What is it that I know? So I was really stuck a few times in this process. And when I am stuck, I do what I always do, and I reach out to talk with someone. In this moment, I reached out to Janice and asked her to just talk with me so that I could make sense of what I had been reading and searching for in the literature about narrative inquiry and the epistemological commitments. And so from our conversation, I took really detailed notes as we talked, and then I stopped looking at the text, at the literature, at the important quotes, and I came back to the understanding that I shared at the start of my turn here, the found poem that I created. And I then felt confident and happy to start with that experience, to share the knowledge co-composed in that conversation. I felt I could share back with Janice what I heard her say and how that conversation had shaped my own understanding of the epistemological commitments of narrative inquiry. And then I felt I could share that with you here today. That was my knowledge. That was the understanding that I carried. And so I had tried to begin with literature and to think with the quotes I could bring here to you. And I found myself very stuck, as that is not a natural way of being for how I engage with research. And so I went back to experience, to story, and to conversation. And then I was again able to trust my own knowing and to believe that I had the knowledge I could share with you today. And then I could then shift my focus back to the lives that were courageously shared with us within Emma and Muna's interim text. Okay, next one. I'm sorry, busy condo. Just training my dog slowly to not protect me. So I'm going to end my part of the sharing here today with some final thoughts. Attending to epistemological commitment of narrative inquiry means understanding that it is all connected. Knowledge is relational. Experience is knowledge. People create knowledge and grow knowledge with other people and other beings. When we say that people are storied beings, we are also coming to the idea that the best or closest way we can get to experience is through story, and that there will never be a final story. Each story of experience opens into new stories to be lived and told, always with the possibilities of retelling and reliving. And we can hear this in the words of Emma, who wrote, "During the process of this narrative inquiry alongside Tessa, I recall feeling the reverberations of the children's stories in my life as a woman, daughter, teacher, educator, and researcher. Several times I had a hard time naming and writing how their stories stayed with me, how I thought with them, and how they also shaped the ways in which I now see and experience the educational relationship, the curriculum of care, and the school as a place where all our stories converge." And we hear this in the words of Muna, who wrote, "Sitting in the car and trying to settle my emotions as I prepared to drive home almost 2 hours later, many more tears escaped my eyes. I knew this research would be difficult to engage in for many different reasons, including bearing witness to her stories of the trauma of displacement. But I had not been awake to the multiple ways her stories would touch at the very heart of so many of the stories living in me. We too," as Sean said, as the listener, the audience, the reader, understand that we are in the midst of composing knowledge, honoring knowledge as stories of experience, and in the midst of a co-composed story that is still yet unfolding. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Firstly, to our hosts for having us. This is a really exciting time. We've been very excited as we've been planning and thinking and moving forward around this opportunity to share. I also want to thank Emma and Mana for putting forward some of the interim research texts that they have created from studies that they're currently working with, because we need those stories to be here with us, to ground us, to give us something to be thinking with. So I'm going to turn our attention a little bit to living in relationally ethical ways. And I would say that I just want to start by expressing some gratitude to my colleagues that are part of our team for letting me be the person to talk about this, because it was actually in my very first narrative inquiry, starting in the fall of 1991, as a master's student, that a young 8-year-old girl asked me a question. I was sitting with her and another young girl talking about pseudonyms in research, and I was still in that place of following all the good researcher kinds of ways. And so this young girl, her name is Elizabeth, that is her real name, looked up at me and she said, "Why would you want to use our real stories when you can't use our real names?" And so, you know, I think about Elizabeth. She would be approximately, you know, a late 30s kind of person now. And she taught me a lot in those moments. And I would say that that's when I began to become a narrative inquirer. And of course, I think that journey, I hope it will continue to be one of growth and learning for a long time to come. So we want to say a little bit about some of what has oriented us and continues to orient us as we try to think about coming and living alongside co-researchers in narrative inquiry. I think one of the first things that happens is that we do trace some of our first being drawn to narrative inquiry to Jean Clendenin and Michael Connolly's description of narrative inquiry as collaborative and requiring a close relationship akin to friendship. This description resonates with what we know from our everyday lives and friendships, that in the ongoing making of a relationship, both people are always involved. In this same way, it also makes sense to us that an inquiry would attend to both co-researchers and narrative inquirers' stories. Man, I'm going to get you to shift to the next slide, please. So then, from our everyday lives and friendships, we also knew the importance of our ongoing attentiveness to how we are living with one another. It made sense to us that we would attend to this how in narrative inquiry. And I think Emma and Mana really draw us in. They show us that aspect quite deeply. They are engaging in narrative inquiry with their whole bodies, their whole beings. There's a lot of feeling that comes through in the interim research text that they have shared with us. And I think, you know, I think that even today in 2021, the dominant narratives, at least in the institutions where I've been, are still not really at that place of lifting up understandings that it is our whole bodies that are coming into this relationship and into the research as we come alongside. I think the other piece that really comes forward here is that we're attending to this how in the midst of the inquiry, and then again long afterwards. Both Emma and Mana show us that you know, as Mana went away and that day after the first conversation with Fatima, she thought in her car, she sat and took some time to really think about what she was feeling. But she was also, so today we're in a different time. And Mana, when she was reading this morning, you could feel the emotion in her voice. And that's because she is in part thinking about those long-term relational commitments and responsibilities that she has. And Emma, of course, is still thinking, working, letting those stories work on her of being alongside Daniel and all of the children and Tessa in those particular contexts that opened up during that inquiry. But I'm going to get you to please shift to the next slide. So I would say that there's been a long a long history in this tradition of narrative inquiry that we work within, that is expressed really quite well in some quite recent work, a book created by Jean Clendenin, Vera Kane, Sean Lessard, and Mana, who is also one of the co-authors in this book, where they really call us to pay attention to our relational ethical responsibilities and how these hold open questions of who we are and who we are becoming, always in relation with co-researchers and the multiple worlds inhabited by them and us, and too by others. And that would include strangers, people who were not part of the inquiry, whom we do not yet, and whom we may never actually come to know. These kinds of questions of our relational ethical responsibilities also ask us to consider the future. So what future worlds does our research and our relational ethical responsibility move me, us, other people, including strangers, institutions, and broader society toward? And then, of course, I really want to highlight, because this has become, I think, at least for me, a really important shift in the early work that I did as a narrative inquirer and where I've come in my journey of still becoming. As Trudy has shown us, these questions of our relational ethical responsibilities are not just about past, present, and future relationships and worlds within, between, and across human beings. These questions need to attend much more broadly to all our relations, which includes human beings and more than human beings. And I would say here that Trudy and I are in a current project with Anishinaabe elder Stanley Peltier. And often when he talks about this, he stretches his arms wide and he talks about the entire cosmos. So we see these aspects in Emma and Mana's stories, their groundedness, and I would add their deep humility about trying to stay awake to and to live these relational ethical understandings and commitments. So I want to turn now a little bit in the tradition of narrative inquiry that we each work within. It's very well established that we often draw upon authors, and I would say other people, not just scholars, who might not name what they're talking about or writing about as focusing on relational ethics, but yet their ideas that they share with us help us to think about how do we come alongside co-research and continue to live in relationally ethical ways. Mana, can you please, thank you. So one of these people is Maxine Green, who really drew attention to how her knowledge of the multiplicity, ongoingness, and often conflicting nature of our multiple identities. Emma's and Mana's stories give us rich insights about this, beginning with their showing how they each came to their present narrative inquiry with puzzles that were shaped from their multiple, ongoing, and conflicting identities. So some examples that come through, they share about being speakers of languages other than English, through which they best know and can express themselves and their lives within, between, and across multiple worlds. I think that aspect of language is something that narrative inquiry has much more recently turned toward. I don't know that in the initial groundings there was as much attending. And I think that's come because people of many different languages have come to narrative inquiry. As a woman, so Mana gives us a sense of her identities as a woman who is Muslim and who lives by the Islamic faith and its cultural and spiritual practices. Mana and Emma give us senses of themselves as former children and youth and as former teachers who have not forgotten or forgiven the complexity of life in classrooms and schools. They also show us about their lives as teacher educators and narrative inquirers, in which this complexity of life in classrooms and schools is still real, it still matters, as do the complexities of life in university teacher education classrooms and programs. Mana shows us also about being an intergenerational survivor of Palestinian displacement, as a mother of a young child who lives with disabilities. And Mana and Emma both show us about being adults who come with deep attentiveness and I would say with great humility and curiosity to the ever unfolding lives of diverse children and families. Someone else that many narrative inquirers have drawn on as they think about living in relational ethical ways is Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, an internationally acclaimed writer of Nigerian ancestry who spoke loudly to the world about how the single story creates stereotypes, and that the problem with stereotypes is not that they are untrue, but that they are incomplete. They make one story become the only story. Mana, can you please do a next shift on the slides? So Mana and Emma's stories show us that their attentiveness to and the humility that they each braid into how they live in relational ethical ways, because they embody courage to show instead of hide or smooth over these moments when they have fallen in to living single stories alongside co-researchers. For example, Mana makes this visible through her including her inward conversation as she and Fatima look together at the university research ethics forums. And I'm just going to highlight again some of Mana's story in her words. As I was trying to explain what the ethics institutionally approved letter had to say about informed consent and her right to withdraw at any time, I was mentally chiding myself for not even considering that potential co-inquirers may not have any formal schooling for many different reasons. I vowed to be more wakeful to how my assumptions will be shaping how I will try to relationally come alongside Fatima from now on. I think what Mana shows us here is both what Chimamanda Adichie is calling us toward in terms of single stories, but also what Maria Lugones has turned a lot of narrative inquirers' attention to in terms of world traveling with loving perception shaped through playfulness, and the ways in which Emma, so I want to read now a little bit from Emma's story, how she shows us some of this shifting from arrogant perception to loving perception, and how important that aspect of playfulness is in this process. So in Emma's words, she says, I was shocked, frozen. I asked myself if I had heard the words, if I understood what the boy, Daniel, had just said. In part, I tried to convince myself that my English was not good enough, and I could be wrong. However, I knew what I heard. How to tell Tessa? I did not know how to explain it, how to put words to something that was bigger than me. I felt I was not yet able to name it. And so we are going to turn back now to some of Mana and Emma's sharing and thinking a little bit more with their stories. But I think that the last thing that I might want to say is just that attending and that we are doing that with our whole bodies, and how very hard it is sometimes to find language to really express what we are experiencing and feeling. And so I want to say gratitude again to Emma and Mana, who I think have been really humble and courageous in trying to give us some language and stories that can help us really think about all of the complexities, the tensionality, the liminality that does come with trying to stay at living in relationally ethical ways. Thank you.
Thank you, Janice. So as now Sean, Trudy, and Janice said and shown, we acknowledge how narrative inquiry is also a process of entering into lives in the midst of each participant and each inquirer's life. It requires, as Muna also shares in her story, a careful relationship with who we are alongside. Now that I was hearing also my colleagues, I was reminding myself how narrative inquiry is a slow and attentive methodology, but also a pedagogical practice that allows me to rethink my ethical, social, cultural, and political commitment and approach with the work I do. A work that reminds me also that I'm always becoming a narrative inquirer, and that I'm also vulnerable and I have some tensions in the research process too. For example, is this a story honoring the profound sense of the significant resonances I am underlying, of the significant resonances inside the research process, or how are my narrative beginnings taking place, the significant resonances I'm underlaying in my research, or how I'm opening new possibilities and wonders through the stories lived and shared alongside my participants? Or am I perpetuating through my writing a dominant narrative that I need to crack? I want to share with you in this slide a fun poem written for an undergrad course that Janice taught back some years ago. And as a Spanish and Catalan speaker, doing such a profound research in another language, in English was very hard for me. And I remember trying to find all the time the most accurate translation for each word of my writing and the eidetic expression that I would use in Spanish. And however, as the time went, I understood that I needed to work with approximations, not with translations, because as researchers, our stories and writings are also approximations of what life means, of what experience entails, of what I'm understanding now. And probably what is important too is how the stories come to us and how we take care of them. Thank you so much for opening your body, mind, and heart with hospitality, as Manuel told us at the beginning, to the stories that we have shared here today.
Okay, wow, thank you, Emma, again. Thank you all. I'm just so grateful to be in this space right now. And as I was trying to figure out what am I going to say after all of the brilliance that has just been shared by everyone, I really just couldn't think beyond, I think, this idea of how really, for me, everything that we're trying to do, I think it's grounded in love, in a profound sense of love and care, because it's hard to trust somebody with your story. And it can be really hard to hear and then carry someone's stories alongside your own, to trust yourself, to do justice, even to try to do justice to the stories others entrust you with. But we still keep at this work. We still do it. And for me, I just remember Bell Hook's beautiful words. We do it because it's what's right. It's what's grounded in love, and it's what keeps us on this path towards a better world in the Lugonian sense, of course. And it's what allows so much beauty to emerge. And because narrative inquiry is a relational way of living and being, it's not just a methodology. It's a way of understanding who you are and who you are alongside others, and understanding, including, as Trudy so beautifully reminds us, and Jan reminds us as well, through her quoting of Trudy's beautiful words, it's including, you know, our more than human relations as well. And so for me, it's always going to be about love. And Bell Hooks helps me to remind me that. And of course, Maxine Green reminds me about it's love towards that which is not yet. It's the possibilities that can emerge. And so for me, as I was listening to our friends throughout the presentation, it just reminds me that narrative inquiry is alive with possibility because of our commitment to relationship, and that we're going to stick with it, even through the tensionality and the liminality. And honestly, even when it's easier not to, because we are not alone. And so I also think of another quote, and I will use this quote to end what I'm going to say right now, but it's written by Barry Lopez for his book, Crow and Weasel. And it's this dialogue that I think is just beautiful. But so quote, "Remember on this one thing," said Badger, "the stories people tell have a way of taking care of them. The stories come to you, care for them, and learn to give them away where they are needed. Sometimes a person needs a story more than food to stay alive. That is why we put these stories in each other's memories. This is how people care for themselves," end quote. And I would also add, and how they care for others. So again, I just feel so blessed to come alongside you all today. And thank you, friends, for taking care of me, of us, and of each other, and our stories, of course.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your talk, your intervention, your possibility that the possibility that you we share your way of understanding the narrative inquiry. It's difficult to be to share emotion in this kind of meeting, but I think it was really hard. I don't know how to it's difficult to find the words, but I think it's nice to share your perspective of doing this kind of work. No? It's not only research; it's related with the life, with your perspective of the world, and I think it's really intense. No? I think now is the moment to share our ideas, perspectives, emotions, questions, and well, we can open our micros and we can share our thoughts or our questions or answers.
Okay, thank you, Nuria, and thank you. I think that I can talk on behalf of my group, and I can say that your research is not just a theoretical inquiry, but that is a way to think with our own other stories. So thank you again. And it is incredible to know that you and we are on the way to understand all implications to recognize the experience in academical, cultural, political, or personal spaces. So I think that it's very important to understand that. And now my name is Margarita Gutierrez. I am a student, a doctoral student right now, and I'm a teacher in primary school in Colombia. And now is with me the teacher Ana Gomez. The teacher Ana is going to share with us this time to debate. So Ana.
Yes, we can start with some questions. If you want to write the questions on the chat, we can speak one after another. And if one wants to start, just raise your hand, physical or by picture, and we can. Okay, Manuel, you can.
I think Carol was the first.
Ah, Carol, sorry.
Don't worry, it's okay. It's okay. I just want to take this opportunity to thank you all for being here. We're very happy to have you here, and I want to thank Nuria also because she's been very occupied with all the preparation of the seminar, and she has made an effort, a very great effort to establish contact with you and make this possible. And so thank you, Nuria, and thank you, Manuel, or all the team from the seminar for making this possible. I would like to start with a question that is very important for the group. Your presentation has a narrative, like a narrative part that is necessary to talk about narrative research. There is not other way to do that. No, we need to know the narratives, and we thank you for that. But we also find that in the academic world, it's very difficult to validate knowledge that we produce in narrative inquiries. What are the difficulties you have found in this? I don't know, the world of publishing an article, or publishing a paper, where the structure is very different that from the structure we can produce in a narrative inquiry. So I want to know some of the difficulties, or if there is no difficulties for you and your group to share the results of your research.
I can maybe.
No, sorry. Do you prefer to listen some questions before or answer one question by question?
I'm thinking maybe one at a time, and then we can just jump in.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, that makes the most sense, one at a time, so we can answer. Otherwise, we'll get confused.
So I was just going to say a little bit in response to your question. I think part of what has really made a difference in North America, Jean and Michael in 1990, they published their first article about narrative inquiry, and it was published in a very prestigious journal, the Journal of Educational Research, which is looked after, published by the American Educational Research Association. And so, I think that part of what happened was there was a bit of a precursor around this is the kind of work that we're starting to do in education. And that journal, that 1990 journal article, went out to vast audiences and gave a sense of what it was that we were trying to do. I don't think it was easy for Jean and Michael, and I can't speak to the other traditions around narrative research. I know this tradition of narrative inquiry best, but I think that part of what also started to happen is that communities of people started to connect with one another. And so people in Canada started to work with people in the United States and into Central and South America, in other places around the world. And I do think that that's really made a difference, because of all the people that are doing narrative now, they're sitting on boards and they're acting as reviewers for different journals. So I think that's one piece that the world really is changing. I know that as a master's student, that I mentioned when I was talking, I often had faculty members who disdained narrative inquiry, and they were quite disparaging about me and my trying to think narratively in the courses I was in. Now, this is in the 1990s. And when I think about today, I think that there is so much more understanding about what we're doing. I think a really key piece in Canada, and I wouldn't feel that I could say a lot about other places. Canada has a very deeply colonial history. There has been a genocide in our country that continues in many ways today. There, I think, has gradually been a turn within the academic world to try to understand, to try to maybe live a relationship that was intended when the first contact happened between First Nation, Métis, Indigenous peoples in Canada and the settlers who were coming. And I think part of that has really focused again on story, that the Indigenous peoples who were here were already living and communicating, as were the settlers who came. And so I think that's been a real benefit in Canada and in the institutions, in the academic places. The other two things I would just say very quickly is that I think when we start with experience and in the form of story, we do draw people in a different way. So Trudy was talking about how we start there and not with necessarily the literature and where the gaps are in the literature. And so I do think that that's a way that will keep readers and reviewers with us, because they want to know more. They want to understand something of the lives. I think too, the other last thing I would just say is that because narrative inquiry is as much pedagogy and how we live our lives and not just create careers and research, you know, there's a lot of potential around programming and courses and the connections that we can make with communities. We, at least in North America, what's really been lifted up is publishing. And yet when we think about narrative inquiry as pedagogy and a way to live a life, there are broader contexts and audiences that, at least in my journey, those people and audiences want to actually be thinking with us about narrative inquiry. And so I'm just going to put that out there and then mute myself.
Thank you, Janice.
Thank you. Thank you, Carol, for your questions, and Janice. So maybe someone wants to ask, or maybe in English or Spanish or Catalan. Siéntanse libres de hacer la pregunta. So maybe you are thinking the question, I would like to ask something about an ethical commitment that you tell us today. So what do you think that ethical commitment has some kind of limits in their relationship with participants in the terms that you define the process of narrative inquiry? What do you think it is that ethical commitment, and how do you manage the limits there?
Sorry, I'd like to speak to that a little bit. First, I'd like to actually respond a little bit to also Carol's question and to add to what Janice just said. So I think one of the things that also maybe we need to trouble is this idea of that we have to make our research legitimate for others? And I know that that goes against almost everything that we're taught in academia. But for me, and it ties in really closely with your story, Margarita, is that for me, the most important thing is that I am honoring of the sharing and the living and the stories that participants and I are engaging in, because their stories are for me at least a very sacred trust. I can't mess with that. I can't mess with that relationship. I can't mess with that trust, because it's the bedrock, it's the foundation of what I'm trying to do. And so it really, really, really is just a different foundation to the work. Because if I'm going to be trying to make it legitimate for others, then I've moved past what the point of what I'm trying to do is alongside co-researchers. And so the reality is, eventually we do move into, you know, from the interim and the field from the field text to and the interim text to final research kind of text. And what I always remind myself is to go back. What is my original commitment? What is my original intention with this? You know, I'm looking at the home that I'm trying to publish in. You know, is this journal, is this book aligned with that? Is it going to help me to get to what the original point of and what I've learned throughout the process is? And so it's just, it's all layered, of course, and it's all complex. But if I feel like a journal won't honor what I'm trying to bring, I pull my piece. I've done that twice already, because I will not move. It's not easy, and it's actually really, and it could, you know what I mean? There's a lot of tensionality there, of course. But if I feel like a home or a journal or a editor is asking me to do something that I feel is wrong for the, you know, for what I've done and the process that we've engaged in, I'll say that, you know, it's not that they're not, you know, they're not ethical, but we don't see it in the same way, of course, right? And so I can just at that point try to create another home or look for somewhere else. But at the heart of it is that commitment to, you know, holding that story in good ways alongside others.
Thank you, Muna. Manuel?
Well, thank you again for your presentation. I felt many things about your ideas. Not only I thought, but I could feel many things about myself. This is not common in this kind of context. So thank you. I have perhaps a simple question about the process you used to write your final papers or your final documents. And this is not only about a technique process, that of course you need tools to write and education to do that and to do better and better and better, and we never find the we never end the process to write in a good way. But how do you do that, especially when you work in group? You work not alone, you work with other persons, with other people, and you need to agree how and what and when to write and what about. And link with this question about the process, about how you do that, I have a curiosity about the poems you shared with us. How is the process to write poems and to write poems about this kind of issues that you are talking about? Thank you.
So I'll give it a shot. When we write in a group, what we typically do first is we have a conversation amongst the group members about what we want to accomplish in our writing. And sometimes I would say that some of the field texts are from one person's study as opposed to all of us, because we have different studies at different times. And then what we do is, I think we make a commitment to the fact that it's everybody's paper. Somebody doesn't do one section, somebody doesn't do another section, somebody does another section. It's all of ours. So when we write into the paper, we make changes. We certainly track them, but I don't think we put our egos aside. And so we don't understand that these are my words. These are all of our words. So that's part of our process for writing. And it's complicated. It's not without its tensions. But what I think helps a lot is that we all have a relationship with each other. We all have a connection to place, to other things. I know that I've done some writing with people who I don't have the same kind of connection to, and it's very complicated and very unpleasant. So I would suggest that you always write with people with whom you have a relationship. And then the idea about the poems is, I think when we first started using that kind of structure, we called them poems or found poems. And then we talked about the fact that they weren't actually really poems because we're not poets, although I did work with a student who is a published poet. So she wrote poems in hers and she was engaged in that process of poetry writing. But our idea is they are word images. So they are lines taken from text, taken from transcripts, taken from our work, our field notes, and put in a kind of a poetic structure. But we refer to them as word images, so we get away from claiming that we're poets. Anybody else?
Thank you, Sean.
I could add a little bit more about the found poem, which I'll now call word images. I never really landed on an appropriate title for what I do. So for me, the writing process is really messy. I have to, and I'm quite an anxious human, and I worry about words that get put out there. And so it's a whole embodied, not traumatic, but very tension-filled process for me. Sometimes writing is joyful and I just put it out there, but then when it comes time to thinking of it's going further beyond just the people I trust, I become quite filled with tension. So what the process of a found word image allows me to do is to take all the stuff that I'd learned, so it's sort of like an, like just throwing all the art materials I have and I put it all out there, and then I look at it as a whole and I start taking out things that I think, okay, not helpful right now. And then I start putting them together and then I see what they say. And somehow in that process, because it's not linear, I can just play with it from whatever. I can let go of my critics in my head that are trying to get me to write like somebody else. And so in this way, I can just narrow in on what matters to me. And then once it's there in this word image and it makes sense, then I know it captures my thinking. So I can also just free write and then do the same thing, but always there's a process of just putting it all on the table, playing with it and messing it around, and then sort of creating a shape of it. And then I can put it forward. So some of it is just me negotiating my anxiety with writing, and some of it's letting my non-linear side have a chance to create knowledge. And then the other, then I put it into, okay, how does it have to look? What do I need to reference? That part of me can come back. So it's sort of letting my heart guide it more than my mind for a while. So that's my process of word images. And it's still very much the words from either the text or the researcher or the participant, it's always still captures their words or the words that I want to, but it allows me to just create with it. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but that's my process.
I want to say that I think another important thing to think about when you're writing is we use the expression reader prose and writer prose. and that when you're doing reader prose, you're writing in a way that the reader can see how you're showing them. So we're showing and not telling when we're writing, and the reader can read it and make sense of it, which ultimately makes us look clever. But I have worked with some people who really want to do writer prose. And I think writer prose to me is that kind of really distilled academic voice. So a writer prose makes the writer look really clever. So I just finished working with somebody who was really into writer prose. Lots of clauses in our sentence, lots of long sentences, lots of commas. But so it was really hard to read. It was really dense to read. So what you want to do, I think, I don't need to tell you what you want to do, but one of the things to consider is, how will the reader read your work? Will the reader make sense of it? And does it make sense to the reader all the way through to the end? Which I think helps, going back to Carol's question, with publications. So when journals see your work, they can see the logical argument and how you help the person make sense all the way to the end.
Well, in your work, there is the investigative imagination. This element, our group, we talk about this element, this imagination, and the question is, how is this imaginative component formed in the researcher, in your work? Which place has the imagination in the narrative inquiry? Because this element is not too frequent in our academic context, but there are many authors who talk about the importance of the imagination. So if you can explain something about it.
I can maybe say something. I was kind of wondering, Emma hasn't had a chance to jump in, so I know that Mana stepped away. I just want to make sure I'm not taking over Emma. No? Okay, I'm looking at...
I'll say something about the community later, because I'm still thinking.
I think this is such an important aspect that you're wondering about. And, you know, I think that this begins, Trudy talked when she was sharing about the autobiographical narrative beginnings. And I think that's often the ground where some of the imagination already starts at that time, because I think when we create the autobiographical narrative beginnings, we're coming often, and maybe this is just me, because I tended to be kind of a hot-headed teacher, in the sense that a lot of bumping with the institutional narratives, but you know, I often am exploring stories that are filled with a lot of tension when I'm creating that narrative beginnings. And so part of what is bringing me to imagination is that I am already at that point trying to imagine, trying to reach toward a different possibility, whether I was in my beginnings as a classroom teacher engaging in narrative inquiry, or as a teacher educator today, or as a mom. It is often for me a connection between tension and wanting to see some kind of a different world. And I would say too that I think there's a real connection here between the political aspect of what, how imagination can come alongside the political narratives that are shaping the context, whether it's the institutions or the communities or the broader society where we live, that being able to think with our stories and stay with them and let them guide us in terms of what are we imagining, what are we actually trying to reach toward, is often, and maybe this is because I grew up and have lived for quite some time in the province of Alberta. And I, for the most part, politically do not, I don't fit here. Like, I've just never fitted here, and my family didn't fit here, and how my parents lived their lives didn't fit politically with those dominant narratives. And so, you know, I do think that it's always that imagination and seeking, wanting to reach towards something else. And also with imagination, I would just add one more thing that, you know, I think as narrative inquirers, someone asked earlier about, are there limits to the relational ethics? And I think we're all different this way, but for me, in the same way that as a classroom teacher, I never felt that there were limits to how I should be in an institutional context that would support children. So if that meant that I needed to go and talk to the superintendent about the policies, then I needed to do that. And I feel really similarly about the limits in terms of the relational ethics as I'm coming alongside children, youth, elders, families, teachers. I think I'm always trying not to put limits, because I think the stories, they guide us as to where we go. And again, I think imagination is part of that. As we're trying to world travel and to stay with thinking with those stories, we keep imagining, where could we go? What is the potential that opens up here? Thank you.
Thank you. I would like to add, Janice, that when you share with us that you are in another country, like in a specific province, like is Alberta, if I understand, and you say that you don't fit and your family don't fit, but when you use your imagination, it's a kind of a resistance. So I think that is the power, okay? That is a power of your mind, the power of the narrative, of the power of the language. So I don't know if maybe you have other questions here, or Emma, do you want to add something?
I just wanted to mention how important it is to be in a community, because I did my doctoral work here in Barcelona, and when I traveled to Canada and I met first Janice, and one of the first things she said was like, and this is your community. They didn't know me, but they said, okay, those are the doors and you can enter, and we trust each other, and we are gonna be engaged with your inquiry. And this is very important also to sustain our lives in the academia, because I do feel the pressure, as some of you said, about publications, for sure. And I love narrative inquiry, but there is also a tension in the middle. How I'm gonna survive in this institution, honoring the stories of my participants. And I do believe that this is a question that is always in movement in our lives. Even if you live in Canada, or you live in Colombia, or you live in Chile, or you live in Barcelona. But, well, I like to think that if we stick together, we have more power to break the dominant narrative. So we really need to stay together, to encourage ourselves to keep going with our inquiries, and to really think narratively with our inquiries, and to support each other. Because if not, I'm not sure I'm gonna survive. I'm junior, so please help us. And so the community piece is key for us, because in Spain, some people do have knowledge about narrative inquiry, or we work with narratives also in our classroom with our university students. But sometimes we don't know the work that we are doing. And we are probably in the same university. For example, now Nuria Prat, I saw you and I said, oh, we come from the same university. How come we did not have coffee together before? Or when Nuria Simó called Janice, and Janice said, Emma, so where is Nuria? And I was like, yeah, we live not close, but yeah, we are from the same community or from the same country. So I do believe that community, we need to work with that. And this would be helpful for us to survive in the academic area, but also to keep honoring the stories that are part of ourselves, but also that the stories that are part of children and youth in the community, in bigger communities. And I just only wanted to share that little piece about community.
And just to add to that, I think a really important part of our writing together is we reference each other, we cite each other. So we build a community through our work. So it's not just that we're friends and we get together physically, but that we use each other's words. So we try to use our students' words. We try to cite our students when we're doing work. And this is so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so's work. So it's always important that we support each other in our writing.
Thank you, Emma and Sean. And if you agree with me, I think that we can stretch a little bit or drink a coffee and stand up if you are right, okay? Yes? Excuse me, but Manuel, then in the end of this session, we can retake this question if you are agree.
Yeah, I think so. We have, according to the program, with the schedule, we have 15 minutes around to take a break. And after that, we will read our short presentation and we can keep discussing and talking about these ideas if you agree. Yeah.
So what time
Okay.
It's
the boss. Where is our boss, Nuria?
Yes, she's.
It's okay, 10 minutes, Nuria?
Yes, I think so,
okay.
No? Okay, no?
Okay.
For everybody, for the community, it's okay?
For the community. Okay.
It's okay, 10 minutes.
And see you.
1:20, we see you again, okay?
Okay, thank you, Margarita. Ens quedem. Ya tenemos energía para seguir. ¿Nos introduces tú, Margarita? ¿Te parece bien? ¿O lo que te ha comentado? ¡Ay, que se ha ido!
¿Me sientas, explicas lo que haremos ahora, Margarita?
Ok, perfecto.
Así, porque si no, si empezamos a... Hello. Hola.
Ok.
Quina puntualitat.
So I think that we can start.
Volviendo. Nos dicen por el chat.
It's okay if we wait for Emma?
Sorry. Emma, yes.
Sí.
Okay, so welcome again, welcome back. And I hope that you a little bit stretch or get coffee or something like that. And now we are going to talk about our experience. So now Nuria, Manuel, Carol, some of us, we're going to share our experience as a group in our seminary. We have 3 different universities, Universidad de Vic, Universidad Pedagógica Nacional in this moment, 2 universities, and now we are going to share with you our experience. It's because my brain is thinking in a group with your university, you know? So now we can start. Thank you again. So Anna is going to start. Thank you, Anna.
Okay. Good afternoon and good morning. I'm going to start explaining our story. During the last 2020, a group of professors and students from the University of Vic, Catalonia, Spain, and the National Pedagogical University, Bogota, Colombia, have been participating in a monthly formative research seminar to debate and build knowledge about narrative research. There is a huge plurality of contexts, biographies, and thoughts among the participants. Besides, all of us come from different academic backgrounds: psychology, pedagogy, social work, education, arts, literature, and philosophy, which implies different theoretical or practical approaches to narrative. Even different levels of compromise on acquires privileging narrative perspectives. However, we share something very important to keep alive our study group after more than a year: a profound desire for knowledge, a strong conviction about the importance of dialogue in academic life, and the idea according to which narrative perspective in an appropriate paradigm to understand personal identity, social relationships, ethical and political issues, or education with different populations: children, teachers, social workers, etc. At the beginning of our enterprise, we defined 3 questions as a guide to our writings and discussions. The first one was, what are the epistemological, political, and ethical implications of narrative research? The second one was, how a narrative inquiry could be carried out. And the last one was, what challenges does narrative research pose to us in different fields of knowledge: education, social sciences, philosophy? At each meeting, one of the participants presents a text in which he or she tries to answer these questions in consideration of his her research or field of study and his or her experience with the narrative inquiry. During the session, the rest of us comment on the text, pose questions, and contribute to the discussion. One of our most discussed issues has been related to the methodological and epistemological place of narrative in our research experience. How have we used in our projects stories told by people we have studied with, or studied about them, or even our own stories? Certainly, all of us consider the narrative approach like a privileged way to understand the very personal experience and the subjective point of view of realities we want to know, and even to help to transform them. Nevertheless, we are aware of the different uses of stories in the researching adventure. Thus, we have read reports where stories are quoted to prove or evaluate a theoretical perspective, or researchers' previous ideas of the reality they want to comprehend. In other cases, stories are the source where deep comprehension of problems comes from. It implies that researchers assume a dialectical perspective to put in dialogue theories and stories, personal convictions in epistemological, ethical, political, social, educational order, and other points of view. Finally, we have found research projects crossed by narrative perspective, where the design of process, building and analyzing information, and even reporting conclusions or challenges of the research are eminently narrative.
Thank you, Anna. Everything good text by our colleagues has helped us to think about different meanings of narrative research. The paper written by Ana Gomez, entitled Narratives in the University as Arguments for Humanistic Education, pointed out her teaching experiences at the university creating narrative text as a way to know the reality from a complex perspective. Anna says, we are narrative beings, and when we carry out our tasks at the university, studying, learning, researching, or teaching, we continue to be narrative beings, beings made up of stories, legends, and tales. Narratives will be supported in the project of approaching a possible truth, a project that must embrace the critical attitude given by the problematization of reality. Hence, we could affirm that there is a clear equivalence between doing research and narrative work, or working with narratives. From another side, in his text, Narrative and Capacity to Begin, Manuel Prada talks about how narratives name the world in a different way. Following his words, narrative has also contributed to making visible subjects and communities historically silenced by the classical form of social sciences or various epistemic violence. It has also served as a sport to demand justice through the recognition of those responsible for crimes, abuses, or omissions. On the other hand, the narration makes another novelty appear in the world, in the possibility of telling in another way. Since most of Carol Pertú's work has been centered on analyzing published narratives, especially testimonial literature and children's literature about political violence, through her text, she poses the question about what makes narrative an inquiry. In her text, Children's Literature and Pedagogy, Vicissitudes of a Problematic Relationships and its Research Implications, she asks, does the approach into a literary source imply, per se, that an inquiry should be labeled as narrative? Also, attending to the relationship between narrative and education and recognizing the potential of tales and literature in general to produce a self-narrative, her text inquires. Children's literature and pedagogy have had a problematic relationship, which is characterized by the subordination of one to the other, or by the instrumentalization of pedagogy over children's literature. What other ways of constructing the relationship between children's literature and pedagogy are possible? Lidia Sala also stated some questions about pedagogical knowledge with her thesis, Teachers' Trajectories, Voices and Context. Let's take a look at a section of her text. The trajectories and contributions of 8 rural innovative teachers from Catalonia, Spain, who were the driving force behind the process of transformation of the rural school in different decades from 1960 until now, have been blurred. So, the narrative want to outline. Who were they? Who did they live? How did they live and feel the process of renewal? How was the eagerness to change things born? What previous experiences did they have? Did these experiences play a role in their willingness to get involved in different processes of change? And in this sense, it is possible that these people had things in common beyond their vocation to fight for rural schools? As you can see, all this example shows us the diversity of our research knowledge and interest in narrative inquiry.
Thank you, Carol. Now, related to the ethical issues, a reiterative question has resulted in a very provocative discussion. What is the treatment in terms of analysis and interpretation that we give to the subject's narratives? The group has agreed in recognizing the imperative of respecting the subject voices without their sacralization. We have spoken about the necessity of finding a balance between the weight we give to the people's voices and the interpretative framework we build to dialogue with them, question and confront them, as a way to question and confront ourselves to produce knowledge. In this situation, we need to find out what is relevant in terms of this interpretative step. In this way, the text presented by Núria Simó poses questions about how to interpret the stories. In my narrative research experiences, the interpretation of narratives has been challenging. In our research with young people, instead of categorizing the conversations, the researchers wrote down the young people's account, discovering threads of meaning that emerged from their words, because we didn't want to segment each story. Narratives build new points of view about youth school experience, but we ask, what implication have this narrative to transform the institutions where young people have felt ignored or mistreated? Margarita Gutiérrez has been working on her project named Narratives of Teachers that Make Us Think about the place of daily teachers' experience. With her proposal, we discussed how we can consider as researchers the epistemological value of knowledge that comes from direct experience. In Margarita's words, the school is a space where experiences and discourses converge. Then there is a great potential from different voices in the daily school life. in these perspectives, the voices of women teachers, yes, women, are placed. In educational research, it is usual to find the experiences of students and families. However, inquiries about teachers and even more narrative inquiries by a woman teacher with women teachers are less common. Voices of women teachers who participate in this project have been belittled and invalidated because the theoretical framework based on their experiences about inclusive education is not recognized. She poses the question of how narrative inquiry can place value on the pedagogical experience of women teachers.
Jorge Aponte, meanwhile, explores the question about how we can deal with memories of painful experiences of the participants. In his words, my experience in the field has been linked to understanding the country's violent events through testimonies. I have had the opportunity to collect narratives from survivors, victims, and actors of political and social violence in Colombia, and with them and their experiences, I have tried to explain what has happened in the last 30 years in Colombia. In this context, we have questioned how, as researchers, we can be respectful of participants' subjectivity, their silences, and their stories. Another ethical tension emerging was about the limits of time involved in narrative inquiry and the commitment with people who take part in our research. To summarize, linked to the methodological issues about uses of narratives on research, we find at least two different ways. A, narrative as a process, where relationships with the subjects are the cornerstone of the inquiry, like we saw in Alba's thesis, where she tried to maintain a balanced relationship with 4 young girls from different backgrounds to know how each one lives their experience of participation at the school, at home, and at their free time. B, narrative as a product, as Joan Arumi, Gemma Torres, and David Rodriguez pointed out in their text. In their words, the proposal that Aya, the teacher, should write a narrative was based on the desire to learn about her educational experience and on the idea that human beings are storytellers that individually and socially lived narrated lives. Aya had to write a personal account of the process that the different cooperative teams carried out in their classes throughout the course, incorporating the essential elements set out by Clandinin, Pusher, and Murray. Firstly, temporality, which means that the events are in a process. Secondly, personal and social conditions, refer to the individuals and their relationship with the group. And thirdly, place, specifying the context in which the research and the events take place.
Thanks, Manuel. Related to the expansion of narrative perspective in education, we find a serious problem concerning publication policy in many journals and reviews. In addition to the process of communicating the results of a research project, which is important to dialogue with an academic community, professors must publish to maintain their jobs or get a promotion in their academic careers. They currently accept a structure for papers that does not allow a narrative style, including writing in the first person or more literary writing. In other cases, especially in some graduate programs and in many classes of research methodology, there is a sort of reluctance to accept different paths to put in dialogue theory and narratives. As a result, the strength of people's voices is sacrificed for the idea of neutrality or objectivity. Sometimes, Reading in a narrative style is a way to be judged like a non-serious researcher or a non-scientific one, which on the other hand constitutes a kind of resistance against a particular academic status quo very popular in our universities. Among other reflections, we have also considered the importance of being trained in a more poetic or literary way of writing. In this way, we have talked about how we need to be voracious readers of literature and learn to identify some interpretative tools in this kind of language. Concerning literature, we have commented likewise on the place it can have as a generator of narratives. Thus, we have asked ourselves, can literature be a pretext for a self-narration? As you can see, questions of different orders have been opening and divided in our seminar. We are traveling together through a complex and rich landscape of narrative research. So now we want to invite you to share the thoughts and questions that you have, and we can dialogue about these pages that we share with you. So thank you so much for your attention. So now if you want to make a question or a comment, so we are hearing you.
Well, I'll jump in. Wow, that was spectacular. I love listening to all the things that you're doing. And I used to teach grade 1, which are 6-year-olds, and I taught 6-year-olds and 7-year-olds for about 20 years. So I love working with children. And I have a student right now who's about to do a narrative inquiry into children's experiences with technology. And she's a little nervous about interviewing children. She's also from Iran, so there's a language issue for her. But what we talked about is that when we're doing research with children, sometimes with young children, she wants to work with really young children. I'm really talking fast, I apologize. I did work with children in grade 5 and grade 6, so about 10 and 11 years old. She wants to work with younger ones. So what I suggested that she do is that she have the children play with the technology because she's interested in play. And then have the conversation while they're doing something, so that the dialogue, and a number of people have talked about dialogue, that's so important, so that the children dialogue with her while they're doing it. So the focus is not on the interview as much as the experience that the child's having and their narration of it. The other thing I think that's really important in everything you said is that as narrative inquirers, we're always concerned with the social significance of what we're doing. So how will we impact society? What kinds of things will we say to society? So questions about teachers, women teachers and children's experience, activists' experience. I made notes all over the place. So all of those things to me tie into the social experience. What we should do in a narrative inquiry, I think, always is hold in our heads, so what? So why is this important? So what are we trying to do? What are we trying to communicate? And when Manuel talked about, I think it was Manuel, yes, narrative as process and narrative as product, that's the same thing, I think, as what Clandinin and Conley said in terms of narrative is the phenomena and the methodology. So we have a experience and people tell us about it, or we see it narratively, and then we have to represent it narratively as well. So, and I'll stop there.
Can I also add something? And I hope that my colleagues and my friends here are okay with me sharing this, because everything that I just heard really brought this forward for me. And so last week, I was asked to present to a group of, so I'll show you the first slide. I was asked to present to a group of deans in Western Canada. So deans of education in Western Canada about racial justice. My work never names racial justice as what I'm trying to foreground. Although of course I'm trying to foreground, but just interesting why I in specific was asked to present about a topic I've never named as the focus of my work. So you have the single story right there. So I actually named this as an issue at the very beginning. But the reason I brought forward for me is this, what I heard from so many of you and from what you were sharing is this idea of the epistemic, like I love this, what you said, Manuel, in your work about epistemic violence and how really what we're trying to do is to change the world, change the world, and through possibility. And that this quote by Ben Okri really came forward for me in what you were, what I heard. And I ground so much of my work in this idea that, yeah, the stories that we inquire into and that we share and that we put out into the world can change the worlds that we are inhabiting. And so, and of course, as Jen, and Emma and Trudy and Sean already have given a voice to as well, and through what you've shared as well, our own autobiographical stories really matter. Because why am I trying to change the world in this specific way? Of course, my own stories are going to make me attentive to certain things. And so even with my research alongside other Muslim mothers of children with disabilities, and the reason I chose to focus on that is through my own stories of trying to advocate for my youngest. She's autistic, she's almost 8 now. And knowing that school systems were never intended to be in relation with us in sustaining ways. We weren't built for that. I would argue for most children and families, but definitely those who are disabled. And so what I'm trying to do through this work is not to have numbers, which numbers can be, of course, important because they tell a different story. But for me, it's how are people experiencing this violence in different ways? And we need to hear them. So I just wanted to add that as well.
Can I interrupt? I have a question for you about violence. When you work with people who have suffered violence, it's really common to find silence more than words. For example, I am thinking about a group of women called Mujeres Víctimas de Falsos Positivos, women victims of assassination. I don't know how to explain in a short way what happened in Colombia with justice and police and etc. But there are a group of women who are fighting for the truth and justice for their children who has been assassinated by the army. This is the topic. And when we talk with them, when we try to make them build stories about their experience, we find silence, no many words. And we have to do something with silence. We have to try to understand what the silence meaning is. And I remember that when perhaps Emma was talking about the first story, you talk about the silence where Daniel says something, or I don't remember who said, oh, he's drunk or something like that about his parent, his father. How do you work with silence caused by trauma, caused by violence? How do you work with other languages, maybe iconical, maybe no discursive, no narrative in a strict sense? What do you think about that?
I'm so sorry. I've taken up a lot of time, but I have to speak to that because of the question itself really gets to the heart of what I'm thinking with right now as I try to write final research texts. Because a lot of what I have so much tension with this work is that the women, I came alongside two mothers, and one of them told me a lot through her silence. So silence gives me a story as well, like around certain things, of course. Another thing that I really was trying to be super careful with is not to try to get the women to share their stories when they're not ready, because of the fact that, of course, with this trauma, and I've read multiple, and since I've talked to them, I've read books, because I didn't want to start with the books. I didn't want to start with the scientific knowing about trauma, even though I was trying to be careful, because I was really worried about imposing that, right? But I've since learned that our bodies literally, as we're sharing stories of trauma, are reliving that trauma. Physiologically, it's proven. So through scientists have shown this over and over again. So to ask someone to relive that trauma and to try to force it is another form of violence, right? And so if they're doing that willingly, yes, we can support, but to do that is really just another form of violence. As I said, what I now would be more wakeful to, if I knew this going in, is that there's multiple ways to share stories. So of course, silence can share a story, but so can photographs, so can drawings, so can just in the ways that we live in different ways. And so I'm thinking now more about representational forms and not just verbally sharing a story. And my daughter, my 8-year-old, who's mostly nonverbal, has taught me this, because she tells me so much without saying a word. And so I'm really been thinking about that as well.
I'll jump in. Thank you, Muna, for sharing this story about your daughter, but also for showing us that sometimes if we force the story with words, this is also violent. And I'm grateful that you have mentioning that, like, you have been very, very clear. We do say, let the story work on you. And I would like to say, let the silence work on us, on each of us, me, myself as a researcher, but also us in our relationship. With children, like with Daniel, as Manuel, you were mentioning before, I didn't know what to do. And I just stopped writing about Daniel's story and Daniel's life, because I was not, and I'm still not ready to come back to those notes, because there is something in me that I know that needs to sleep a little bit. And I do believe that this is also a way to honor the story, to just being there. Like Daniel is with me when I'm teaching at my university. Sometimes I talk about him, I share that story, and we start to ponder about and think narratively with this story. But when sometimes I do feel like I want to find words, and I'm not sure this is a way to honor that story. So we might need to find other ways, other languages, as Muna also was mentioning before.
I also want to jump in, unless I'm cutting Trudy off. I need to see her.
I'm here. You can go ahead. I will. I can share after you, though, if we have time.
I really am resonating with where we're at in this conversation at this point. And I think the idea that we live stories as well as tell stories is really important. And so, you know, part of some years ago, and I think Sean will correct me, and maybe others if I get this wrong, but in about 2006, Michael Conley and Jean Clendenin wrote an article about how there are two different ways to start an inquiry, one in the living and one in the telling. And I know for me, that was an important paper for me, because, you know, part of what I think we need to be thinking about is back to that relationship and the coming alongside. We're always in that coming alongside. Now, I know that the institutions have timelines and grants often have timelines, but I think when we hold central that we're always coming alongside. And I would say that in my journey, you know, one of the studies that I was really privileged to be part of was with Aboriginal teachers and researchers and elders in 2 different provinces in Canada. And I really realized in the midst of that study that I needed to draw less on what lived in my head, what I had been taught by the institution, and more about what lived in my heart. And I can say that that came from my home, how my parents raised me, you know, the adults that surrounded me and the other beings that surrounded me as I was growing up. And so, you know, I spent time in their homes, and we made food together, and we laughed and we cried and told stories about our lives just in the everydayness of being together. And I think that's a really important aspect about, you know, being alongside in the everydayness. And someone that, well, I think all of us know, Cindy Swanson is, to me, she's young because I'm quite a bit older than her, a young Métis researcher that really turned my attention to this as well, because she asked me one day when she was doing her doctoral work about, why don't we ever talk about visiting? And I thought, yeah, why do we never talk about visiting? Because I grew up knowing how to visit with people. I was a child who sat at a table or, you know, around fires with adults as well as other children and youth. And so I guess what I think I'm trying to highlight here is, I think we know how to visit from our own lives. And sometimes I think we get really focused on what gets written and published in books about narrative inquiry, and we quit listening to what we know in our own beings from just our everyday lives of being people. And I think you're really raising an important aspect in terms of narrative inquiry. Thank you.
I'm usually a time watcher, so it looks like I have 1 minute to share maybe, but I'm going to do it fast. I just wanted to add to the conversation that in my doctoral work, I worked with teenagers. They're grades 7 to 9, and I wanted to understand their experience as Indigenous young women, you know, at that sort of age where you're transitioning from elementary, junior high, and eventually heading off to high school. And I wanted to understand the stories they heard about themselves as Cree women, as Indigenous people, you know. So I'd be like, what does it mean to you to be Cree? And they would be like, moccasins, feather, you know. It would be a very awkward conversation. And so I'd bring out art stuff and I'm like, okay, I'd have all these brilliant experiences. And then I would write about it after. And after a while, I started to think, oh my gosh, I'm not doing this research right. I have like nothing, because it was like feeling like not much was happening. You know, sometimes we'd eat, sometimes we would do what I wanted, sometimes we'd do what they wanted. I would pay attention in my field notes to how we felt and how we looked. And then after I looked back, I noticed that I started to pay attention to their energy. You know, they'd walk in at the start of a school year shiny, or a new school, a transition to a new school, so full of hope and literally new makeup, new hair, new stuff. And then a couple weeks later, they would come in and art book not opened. You know, you could just see the shift in their body. So I didn't have a lot of words from them to help me tell the story of our time together. But when I started to pay attention to what our bodies were telling us and what the energy was, and, you know, like if I looked back, like literally if I looked up and around instead of at what we were doing, so many stories being told. And so by the end of the 3 years, it was so rich with stuff that I didn't see in those first, I was like, oh my God, I'm doing this wrong. I don't have anything. And in the end, those big long silences where we just ate and we talked about boys, like it was nothing exactly on topic, but they were telling me so much of who they were. So I had to learn to come at it sort of, from the view of a teenager. So I'm not sure if that's helpful, but that's what I had to do, and really slow down and literally look up at them and see what was going on. Thank you.
Gracias, Freddy, and of the group. Eulalia, ¿tú compartiste algo? Do you want to read in your voice, or do you prefer that I read it?
Well, I'll try to read in English, sorry. Well, when we spoke about silence, I was thinking we were researching about the silence in the Francoism, but not the silence who people to be silenced, if not silence provoked by the institutions. And I think it's linked with the indigenous in Canada, is people who are not in the academia because their life doesn't matter in a way in the academia. And also, when we think about that in the past, we look at the poems of from Germany during the 50s after the Second World War. And they spoke about the silence through words. And when you spoke about the poems at the beginning, and I make the links, because I think this is a different kind of silence. And like you say, the body is explaining something. And in history, for example, something that is a nice research about what the children were on the pockets of the, I don't know, the coats. And this is another kind of research about silence, which usually doesn't come out on the light. And something you have said before, I think it's really important from Anam and Nuria and all the colleagues from Canada, is about the ethics. What are our limits as researchers? Can we search in the pockets, where people doesn't want to be shown? As an adults, we can look at them, but I'm not sure if we have to do that. And also in people's lives is, in a way, it's my problem is I want to know everything, but I think not everything needs to be known. And something like that. I don't know if I can explain good in English, sorry, but it was all that. It's just use the literature.
Thanks, Eulalia. I think that all of us understand your point. Thank you for sharing your importance idea. I think that the context that you plan that situation, it's very important to understand the huge challenge for that. I would like to add something about Trudy says about the women, because in the research, sometimes we think that the voices of the women are not too available, no? Because maybe for the media or the universities, it's not just an attack of the men, no. It's just because the women have other situations, for example, for publication or to hear other voices. So thank you for this time to share through your experience. And I think that is intersectionality thing that we can think about. There is indigenous, there is a women with disability, maybe it is a mom, or it's a single, or it's a lesbian, so it's different. Thank you. Someone else, maybe? Okay.
Yeah, I'm so sorry. I'm going to have to leave. I did have another meeting with students that I had committed to, but thank you so much for having me here and for allowing me to share some of my stories as well, and for allowing me to hear some of yours. And so I was honored, and I hope you all have a great rest of your day or evening.
Thank you.
Take care, friends.
It was great to share with you your thoughts and your perspective.
Thank you so much. Goodbye. Take care.
I am also going to need to go. My mom duties are going to kind of take over here in a few minutes. So I too just want to express really deep gratitude. Nuria, thank you for reaching out and for starting to connect us. This has been a really powerful morning, and I'm just in awe of the group that all of you have created together across different disciplines and geographic and political contexts. I've never been part of a space like that. And yet I think as the pandemic and other aspects in our world are showing us that we need these kinds of spaces. So my greatest hope is that we're going to stay connected and maybe keep building so that we can come and hang out with you every month and think together and learn through this process. So thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Janice. So we have some news for you. First, we are preparing a book to collect our papers. And thank you, Janice, Trudy, Sean, and Muna, who is not here, for your generosity with your papers. We are waiting for the final version. And this is a really good idea, not just because of the publication, but because it's a way to start an adventure together. I think that this is a way to think about this project. And secondly, we have to, or we dream about have another meeting next year. We don't know where and how, but I hope that we can share again this kind of experience, maybe one day, not 2 or 3 hours. So perhaps by email we can organize better the next meeting, if you agree. Okay. And of course, with more participants, with more interventions, etc.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
For us, this 1 year ago, we dreamed with a possibility to make a year later a seminar. We don't, at the moment, in January of 2020, we don't know how and with what kind of people, but now we are here and we can share and we can follow our relationship in the future. So it's a good begin, I think. And it's possible.
The near future, I just wanted to say to you all, that idea that I really believe in that our grandmothers, our ancestors, the other realms bring us together for a reason, and that we're all supposed to be here in this moment coming to know each other because it's part of all of our future. So I really want to thank you for this opportunity and all that you've given me to think about, including how much to share and ask for and how much not to, and what stories we might want to keep closed and which we're ready to open up to. And I just really appreciated this opportunity to be alongside and think with you. So thank you.
Thank you, Trudy.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Joan Arumi, because he's the organizer, one of the organizers from the University of Vic. Thanks for your job. This was possible because of you. So thank you very much, Joan. Okay. The boss, say the last word.
You can close.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
I have to leave also.
We need to finish because.
Thank you, everybody. This really, I like how we think of this as a beginning. So I really think it's a beginning, and I look forward to working with as many people as we can and the work that we will generate in the future with our texts. So thank you very much for a great morning or evening, as it may be, wherever you are.
Okay. See you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Good day
Take
for
care.
you. Bye.